A set. Something built to look like a life. That's where I left off, isn't it? Standing in my own bedroom, looking at the pillows Mark had arranged that morning, two on each side, symmetrical, the way he always did it, and feeling for the first time that I was standing inside a photograph of a marriage rather than a marriage. The duvet pulled tight, the lamp on his nightstand angled just so. Walter asleep at the foot of the bed, one ear folded under, breathing that slow, wet rhythm basset hounds have when they're completely unbothered by the world they live in. I envied that dog. But here's what happened next, and I want to be honest about it. The version of me that walked through this next part was not brave. She was not suspicious. She was someone who wanted the simpler answer so badly she built a house out of it and moved in. I told myself a story. It went like this. Lena was a good therapist. She had done 14 months of deep, thorough work with Mark. Of course, she didn't need to ask him basic background questions in a joint session. She already had all that. Of course, she seemed familiar with his patterns. That was the point. That was what good therapy looked like from the outside when you arrived late to it. You walk into a room where someone already knows your husband better than you expected, and the strangeness of that is a red flag. It's evidence of progress. And the question she had asked, has it occurred to you that the silence might not be about needing space, but about keeping it? I told myself that was precise clinical language. She was doing her job, helping me see something I'd been too close to see. I told myself Camille was being Camille, a paralegal, a woman who reads fine print on cereal boxes and once flagged a typo in her own lease agreement that saved her $400. Of course she'd say something like she already knew him. That's how Camille's mind works. Patterns, suspicion, the worst version of every story. I loved her for it, the way you love the sister who always locks the door twice. But I didn't need to live inside her anxiety. So I called Camille back the next day and said, I think you're reading too much into this. She's just really good at what she does. And Camille said, okay. Flat. One syllable. The same way she said it the first time. But I didn't hear the filing cabinet in her voice. I didn't hear a woman not arguing because she'd already decided to find out for herself. I heard agreement. I went to the second session. Following Tuesday, late afternoon. Same office. Same noise machine whirring in the waiting room. That sound. Rain that doesn't quite sound like rain. More like static shaped into weather. Same chair. The magazines were in the same position. I'm almost certain no one had touched them between sessions. Spines still perfect. Still unopened. Props. Lena was warmer this time. She smiled when I came in, and there was something different in the way she addressed us. Not Mark and Jolene, but you two. A unit. She said she wanted to introduce something she'd been working through with Mark in their individual sessions. She called it the architecture of silence. The phrase landed in my chest like a key turning. She explained it like this. Long-term couples develop unspoken contracts about which topics are off-limits. Over time, those contracts harden. They start to feel like stability. Like the relationship is strong because certain things never get disturbed. But that's not intimacy. That's architecture. A structure built to hold weight but never tested. Then she looked at me, right at me, and she said, you've built a beautiful tolerance for Mark's quiet, but tolerance isn't intimacy. I cried. Not a lot, a few tears, the kind that come when someone names the thing you've been circling for years without finding the word. I thought she had just handed me clarity. The precise shape of my loneliness in this marriage, how Mark's silences had become rooms I furnished with my own explanations, and how exhausting that was, and how I hadn't even known I was tired. Mark reached over and held my hand. His fingers were warm. His grip was steady. I looked at him and his face was soft, open, present in a way I hadn't seen in months. I didn't look at Lena in that moment. If I had, I wonder what I would have seen. After the session, Mark drove us to a restaurant on Hawthorne. Low light. Bread they bring before you ask. He was lighter than he'd been in months. Animated. He talked about the session like a man who'd just had something confirmed. He said, I really think this is going to help us. He said, Lena is the best therapist I've ever had. And then he said, and I want to give you this line exactly as it was delivered because I've turned it over so many times since that the edges are smooth. He said, she just understands how I'm wired. I nodded. I said, she really does. We ordered wine, split a dessert. It was one of the best evenings we'd had in over a year, and I know now it was built on a framework designed to keep me from asking the question that would have ended everything. The architecture of silence wasn't a diagnosis of our marriage. It was an instruction manual for keeping me patient. Over the next 3 weeks, we attended 2 more sessions. Lena gave us exercises, nightly check-ins, 5 minutes before bed, where we each shared one thing we noticed about the other that day. A shared journal, leather-bound, one she recommended we buy, where we'd each write an entry once a week. And a vulnerability prompt for Sundays, a question we were supposed to answer together. I did every one of them, faithfully, the way you follow a prescription when you believe in the doctor. I wrote in the journal every Wednesday night. I sat across from Mark every Sunday and answered the prompts. I noticed things about him and said them out loud at 10:47 each night, standing at the bathroom sink, toothbrush in hand, feeling like we were rebuilding something important. Mark participated. That's the word. He participated the way a student participates when the teacher is watching. His journal entries were clean, considered. They used words like attunement and rupture and repair. They didn't sound like a man sitting with a pen and a feeling. They sounded like a man sitting with a pen and an audience. I noticed. Filed it under Keys's trying. He's just more formal in writing. Then came the Sunday prompt that cracked the floor. The question was, what is one thing from your life before this relationship that still affects how you show up today? Mark thought about it, picked up the pen, wrote slowly in that architect's handwriting he had. Tall, even letters. He wrote, I learned early that people leave when they see the full picture. So I edit. I read it. Something cold moved through my sternum. It was precise enough to sound honest and vague enough to mean anything. I asked him what he meant. What full picture? Who left? He put the pen down, looked at me the way he looks at me when he wants me to feel held without actually being answered. And he said, just old stuff. Lena and I have worked through most of it. Lena and I. Not my therapist and I. Not in therapy. Not even Dr. Voss. He said her name like you say the name of someone you've sat across from 1,000 times, someone whose coffee order you know. I felt the seam, right where the truth stopped and the performance began. The way you can feel a patch in drywall if you run your hand slow enough. But the framework, Lena's framework, the architecture of silence, the model that said pressing too hard too fast could damage the process, it sat between me and the question like a guardrail. And I thought, he is doing the work. He is being vulnerable. The Sunday prompt is working. The system is working. I let it go. I let it go because the system told me to. And the system was designed by a woman who needed me to. There's an irony so specific here that I still can't hold it without something in my rib shifting. Lena had given me a language to understand my own marriage, and that language was the exact mechanism keeping me from asking the one question that would have unraveled everything. Who are you to my husband? The framework wasn't a flashlight. It was a curtain. I would have stayed behind it. Months, probably. Doing the exercises, writing in the journal, crying in sessions when Lena named something true enough to earn my trust. then going home and lying next to a man whose silence I'd been trained to respect. I would have stayed because the lie was so well constructed that living inside it felt like growth. But Camille, who said okay and meant I'm going to find out myself. Camille, who works at a family law firm in Salem and has access to public records databases, who once told me the most dangerous document in the world is the one nobody thinks to look for. She ran a background check on Dr. Lena Voss. She didn't tell me she was doing it, didn't ask permission. She waited until she had what she needed, and then she called me on a Wednesday night, 9:15, while I was folding laundry and half watching something I can't remember on the television. Her voice was flat. Not angry flat, not worried flat. The kind of flat that comes when someone has been sitting with information for hours and has already metabolized the shock and is now just holding the facts like stones in both hands. She said, "I need you to come over, and don't tell Mark." I almost didn't go. I want you to know that. I stood in my laundry room with a warm towel in my hands and thought about saying no, about telling her she was overreacting, about protecting the thing I'd built with Mark and Lena, and the Sunday prompts, and the shared journal, and the architecture of silence that was teaching me to be a better wife. I almost chose the lie one more time, but something in Camille's voice was load-bearing. It was holding something up that would fall if I didn't stand in my own bedroom with her, looking at the pillows I drove to her apartment that morning, 22 on each side, annoyed the whole way. The way I rehearsed what I would say, and feeling that for the first time that I was standing inside a photograph of a marriage rather than a marriage. That I was finally in a good place. The duvet pulled tight, and she was undermining it. The lamp on his nightstand angled. I walked in, and Camille was standing at the kitchen table, at the foot of the bed, not sitting, one ear folded under, breathing. Two documents slow, on the table, wet rhythm printed on plain white when paper, they're completely laid side by side like evidence in a courtroom. I envied that which dog, I suppose they were. But here's what happened next. The first was a marriage certificate. And I want to be honest about it. Humboldt County, California. The version of me that walked through dated this 2009 next part was not brave. The groom's name was Mark David Hale. She was someone who wanted name the was Lena Marie so badly she built a house out of it. The second was a dissolution of marriage. I told myself a story. Finalized it went like 2012. Lena was a filed good therapist. By Lena. She had done 14 months of deep, thorough work with Mark. I stood over that table. Of course, she didn't need to ask him basic background questions. Camille watched me the way you watch someone she already had all that ice. She said of course quietly, she seemed familiar with Lena Voss is a professional name. That was the point. Her legal name is Lena Kovacs. That was what good therapy looked like. She was married to Mark for 3 years, late to it. My first instinct was not to scream. Someone already knows your husband better than you expected. It wasn't tears, and the strangeness of that is a red flag. I started counting backward. Evidence of progress. Every session and the question every she'd exercise. Every time Lena tilted her head might not be about needing space, and I thought it was clinical attention, but about keeping it. Every time I told myself that was answering, and I thought he was being thoughtful. She was doing her job. The vulnerability prompt, helping me see something I'd been too close to see. I learned early that people leave when they see the full picture. I told myself Camille was being Camille, so I edit. A paralegal, the architecture of silence. A woman who reads fine print on cereal boxes. She just understands how and once flagged a typo. He wasn't speaking therapeutically. Saved her $400. He was speaking historically. Of course, she'd say something like she already knew how Lena got licensed. That's how Camille's mind works. She'd already looked into it. Patterns. Lena went to graduate school after the worst version of every story. Did her clinical hours. I loved her for it. Passed the way you love the sister who always built a legitimate practice. On paper, but I didn't need to live inside her anxiety. Credentials verified. So I called Camille back Psychology the next day Today and said, profile current. I think you're reading too much into this. Listed like a badge. She's just really good at what she does. And identity formation and Camille after said, attachment disruption. Okay. Flat. All real. One syllable. And also, the same way she was Mark's first wife. But I didn't hear the filing cabinet on her former husband and the woman. I didn't hear a woman not arguing without because she'd already decided to find out for herself, without any ethical framework that any licensing board in any state would recognize Tuesday as anything other than a violation. Same office. I sat at Camille's kitchen table for 2 hours in the waiting room. I didn't cry. That sound Camille made rain coffee that doesn't quite sound like rain. more
I
like
watched the
static
steam
shaped into
rise
weather.
from the mug and thought
Same
about the
chair.
orchid in Lena's
The
waiting
magazines
room.
were in the same
The
position.
one I'd stared at for 10
I'm almost
minutes
certain
during my
no one
first
had
visit,
touched them between
admiring
sessions.
how the light caught the petals,
Spines still perfect.
the silk orchid
Still unopened.
the one that looked so
Props.
real I never questioned it.
Lena was warmer this time.
I asked one
She
question.
smiled when I came in,
Said it almost to
and
myself.
there was something different in
not
the way
really
she addressed
expecting an
us.
answer.
Not Mark and
Did
Jolene,
he go to her?
but you two.
Or did she come
A
to him?
unit. She said
Camille
she
shook her
wanted
head.
to introduce something she'd
She
been
didn't know
working
yet.
through with Mark
I
in their
understood
individual
sitting there
sessions.
that the answer to
She
that
called
question
it the
would determine
architecture of
everything.
silence. Whether
The
Mark
phrase
was a
landed
man
in
who
my
made a
chest
destructive,
like a key
delusional choice,
She explained
or
it
a
like
man
this.
who was recruited back into
Long-term
something
couples
I
develop
hadn't yet
unspoken
mapped.
contracts about
Whether
which
Lena
topics
was
are
complicit
off-limit
or orchestrating.
Over time,
Whether the
those contracts
therapy was a
harden.
failure of
They start to
boundaries
feel
or
like
a design.
stability.
Like the
I did not
relationship is
confront Mark
strong
that
because
night.
certain things never get
I
disturbed.
drove home,
But
parked in the
that's not
driveway, and
intimacy.
sat in the car
That's
for 6
architecture.
minutes.
A
Staring
structure
at the
built
blue
to
front
hold
door
weight,
of our
but
house.
never tested.
The door I'd painted 3
Then she
years
looked
ago
at
on a
me,
Saturday while Mark
right at
handed
me.
me the brush,
And she said,
and Walter sat in the
"You've
grass
built a
barking
beautiful
at nothing.
tolerance for Mark's quiet."
That door had meant something
But tolerance
to me.
isn't intimacy.
It had meant, we live
cried.
here.
Not a
This
lot.
is ours.
A few tears.
I went
The kind that
inside,
come when someone
brushed
names
my
the thing
teeth,
you've been circling
got
for
into
years
bed beside
without
Mark.
finding the word.
He was already
I thought she
asleep,
had just handed me
or
clarity.
performing sleep.
The precise
I no longer
shape
knew
of
the
my
difference.
loneliness in this marriage.
I lay on my back
How Mark's
and stared at the
silences
ceiling,
had become
and the
rooms I
silence
furnished
in
with
that
my
room
own
was
explanations,
unlike any silence
and how
I'd lived
exhausting that
inside
was.
before.
And how I
It wasn't
hadn't
the
even
absence
known
of
I was
words.
tired.
It wasn't Mark needing
reached
space.
over and held my hand.
It wasn't the architecture
His fingers
of anything.
were warm.
It
His
was the
grip was
presence
steady.
of a second marriage
I looked at
sitting
him,
on
and
top
his
of
face
mine
was
like
soft,
a transparency
open,
laid over a photograph.
present in a way I
Same
hadn't seen
shape,
in months.
different image.
I didn't look at Lena in
And
that
I
moment.
had been looking at both
If I
for
had,
years and
I
seeing
wonder
only
what I would
one.
have seen.
I went through
After
his
the
journal
session,
entries
Mark
the next
drove us to a
morning while
restaurant
Mark was
on
in the
Hawthorne.
shower. Low
Every
light,
single one.
bread they bring before
and
you
I
ask.
saw it now.
He was
The
lighter
pattern
than
he'd
he'd been
noticed
in
weeks
months
ago and couldn't
animated.
name.
Every
He talked
insight
about the
he
session
brought
like a
home
man
from
who
therapy.
just had something
Every
confirmed.
phrase Lena had given
He said,
every
"I really think
exercise
this
and
is going to
prompt
help
and
us."
model.
He said,
They were all about me.
"Lena is the
how I
best
respond to
therapist
silence,
I've ever had.
how I accommodate.
And then he said,
my tolerance for
and I want to give
distance.
you this line
My
exactly
willingness
as it was
to fill the
delivered
space
because
he
I've
left
turned it
empty.
over so many
14
times
months of therapy,
since that the edges
or
are
4
smooth.
years apparently.
He said,
and not
she
one
just understands
insight
how I'm
about
wired.
himself. I
Not
nodded.
one.
It was a
I
curriculum.
said, she really
And
does.
I was the subject.
We ordered wine.
I closed the
Split
journal,
a dessert.
put it back on the
It
nightstand
was one of the
exactly
best
where it
evenings
had
we'd
been.
had in over a year.
Heard the shower turn off,
And I know now
heard
it
Mark
was built
step
on a
out,
framework designed
heard
to
him
keep
reach for
me
the
from
towel,
asking the
and
question.
I stood in our bedroom
would
with
have
my
ended
hand still on the
everything.
leather cover and
The
understood
architecture
something
of
I can
silence
only
wasn't a
describe as
diagnosis of our
architectural.
marriage.
I had not been
It
living
was an
in a
instruction
marriage.
manual for
I
keeping
had been
me
living
patient.
in a study.
Over the next
That
3
night, I
weeks,
pulled
we
the
attended
insurance
2 more
records from the
sessions.
filing cabinet in
Lena
the
gave us
office.
exercises.
Mark kept them organized.
Nightly
Of course he
check-ins.
did.
5
In labeled
minutes before
folders by
bed,
year,
where we each
I
shared
found the mental
one
health
thing
claims,
we noticed about the other
found the
that
provider
day.
name.
A
The
shared
first
journal,
claim wasn't from 14
leather-bound,
months ago.
one she
It was
recommended
from
we buy,
2017,
where we'd each
1
write an
year
entry
into our
once a
marriage.
week. 4
And a
years before
vulnerability
he told me
prompt for
he'd started
Sundays.
seeing someone.
A question we
4
were supposed
years
to
of
answer
weekly
together.
sessions with a woman whose
I
last
did
name
every
used to be
one of
his.
them.
Faithfully.
And every single evening,
The way you
he
follow
came
a
home from
prescription
those
when you believe
sessions.
in the doctor.
He came home to me.
I wrote in the
I
journal
put the
every
folder
Wednesday
back,
night.
closed
I
to
sat
the
across
cabinet,
from Mark every Sunday
stood in
and
the
answered
dark
the
of that
prompts.
office, and I could
I
hear
noticed
Mark
things about
downstairs,
and
opening
setting
a
them out
bottle
loud
of
at
wine,
10:47
the soft
each night.
pop of the cork,
Standing at
a
the
glass
bathroom
being
sink,
set on the counter,
toothbrush in hand,
ordinary
feeling
sounds,
like we were rebuilding something
domestic
important.
sounds, the sounds
Mark
of a man who
participated.
thought the architecture was
That's
still
the word.
holding. He
And
participated
I thought
the
about
way
something
something
Lena
Lena
had said in our
very
very
first
first
session.
session.
The thing
His
I
journal
hadn't been able
entries
to
were
stop
clean.
replaying.
Considered.
The sentence that had
They
lodged
used
in
words
me like
like
a splinter I
attunement
kept
and
pressing.
rupture
And
and
the
repair.
silence might not be about
They
needing
didn't
space.
sound like a man
It might
sitting
be
with
about
a pen
keeping
and
it.
a feeling.
She was right.
They sounded like a man
Exactly
sitting
right.
with a pen and an audience.
She just wasn't talking about Mark.
I noticed.
She was talking
Filed
about
it
herself.
under Keys's trying.
I didn't
He's
sleep
just
that
more
night
formal
either.
in writing.
I
Then
lay
came
there
the Sunday
listening to
Mark
that
breathed,
cracked the floor,
counting the years.
The question was,
Somewhere
what
around
is
2 in the
one
morning,
thing
I
from your
realized
life
I was
before
going to
this
go back into
relationship
that room.
still affects how you
One
show
more
up today?
time. Not as
Mark
a wife,
thought about it,
not as a patient,
picked up the pen,
not as a woman
wrote
working on her
slowly
marriage,
in that architect's
as someone who
handwriting he
finally
had.
understood what she was
Tall,
looking at.
even letters.
I had the documents in
He
my
wrote,
bag. I
could have
learned
ended it
early
then,
that people leave
but I
when
needed
they
to
see
see
the
the full
room
picture.
clearly one more time,
So
because I
I
still didn't understand
I read
why.
it.
Something
And there
cold
was
moved
something
through my
else.
sternum.
Something small.
It was precise enough to
lodged in the
sound
back
honest
of my
and
mind
vague enough
like
to
a
mean
word
anything.
you can't quite reach.
I asked him what he
The
meant.
birthday card.
What full picture?
The one I'd given
Who
Mark
left?
3 years ago.
He put the
The
pen
one
down.
he'd found in his
Looked
desk
at me the
drawer
way
when
he
I was
looks at
looking for
me
stamps.
when he wants me to feel
I'd
held
written
without
inside
actually
it,
being answered.
to the man who taught
And he
me
said,
that love doesn't have to be
just old
loud.
stuff.
I remembered
Lena
thinking
and
it
I
was
have
sweet
worked
that he'd
through
kept
most of it.
but it never looked
Lena
at the
and
back. The week
Not
before
my
the last
therapist
session,
and
I went through Mark's
Not in
filing
therapy.
cabinet while he was downstairs
Not
pouring
even
wine.
Dr. Voss.
No, he said her
That's
name
not
like
right.
you say the name of someone
I didn't
you've
go
sat
through
across
it.
from 1,000
I
times.
opened it the way you open
someone
something
whose
you
coffee
already know
order
will
you
hurt
know.
you.
Slowly,
I felt the seam
with both hands,
right where the
like
truth
the drawer
stopped
itself
and the
might
performance
flinch.
began.
Mark kept
The way you
everything
can feel
labeled.
a patch in drywall if you run your hand slow enough.
Color-coded tabs.
But the framework,
blue for medical,
Lena's framework,
green for financial,
the architecture of
yellow
silence,
for insurance.
the model that said pressing too
always
hard
thought
too
it was a
fast could
personality
damage
trait.
the process.
The neatness.
It sat between me
One of those things
and the
you describe
question,
at dinner
like a
parties as
guardrail.
endearing.
Mark,
And I thought,
so organized,
he's
it's
doing
almost
the work.
pathological, it'd
He's
say.
being vulnerable.
And people would laugh.
The Sunday
and he'd
prompt
do
is
that
working.
modest shrug.
The system is working.
But standing in his
I let it
office
go.
with the insurance folder
I
open
let
on
it
the
go
desk
because the system
I
told
understood
me
the
to.
organization wasn't
And the system was
personality.
designed by a woman
was
who needed me to.
infrastructure.
You
There's
don't
an
build a
irony
filing
so
system that
specific
clean
here that
unless
I
you need
still
to know
can't hold
exactly
it
where
without
every
something
piece
in
of
my
your
rib
life is
shifting.
stored. So you know
Lena
what
had
someone
given
would
me a
find
language
if they
to
looked.
understand my
I
own
already
marriage,
knew the first
and that
claim
language
of Lena
was the
dated
exact
to
mechanism
2017,
keeping me from asking
Camille
the one
had found
question
that would have unraveled
but I wasn't looking
everything.
for the start date
Who
anymore.
are you? To my
I
husband.
was looking for the shape.
The framework
52
wasn't a
claims
flashlight.
year.
It
Every
was a
year.
curtain.
2017,
I would have stayed behind it.
2018,
Months.
2019, 2020,
Doing the exercises.
2021,
Writing in the journal.
2022,
Crying in sessions when
2023,
Lena named something true enough
weekly
to earn
sessions,
my trust. Never a gap
then
longer
going
than 2
home
weeks.
and lying next
and
to a
those
man
gaps
whose
always
silence I'd been
coincided with
trained
the
to
trips
respect.
Mark and I took together.
I would have stayed
Cannon
because the
Beach,
lie was so well
the
constructed
anniversary
that
in
living
Bend,
inside it felt like
Thanksgiving
growth.
with my mother.
But Camille,
He paused his sessions when
Camille,
I'd noticed
who
the
said
absence
okay
and resumed them
and
the
meant
moment we were back
going
in
to find
routine.
out myself.
I
Camille,
counted,
who works
somewhere
at a family
around
law firm in
270
Salem and has
sessions,
access to public
give or
records
take.
databases.
270 hours in a room
document
with
in
the
the
woman he
world
married
is the one
first,
nobody thinks
while
to
I
look
was home
for, or at
she
work,
ran a background check
or
on
writing in
Dr.
the
Lena
journal
Voss.
she assigned us.
She didn't
or
tell me she
walking
was doing
Walter
it,
around the block,
didn't
thinking
ask
how
permission.
lucky I was that my husband
She waited
believed
until
in
she
doing
had
the
what
work.
she needed, and then she called
Downstairs,
me
I
on
could
a
hear
Wednesday
him pulling
night,
a cork from a bottle.
9:15,
While
while
I
I
was
was
folding
folding
laundry
laundry
and half watching something
then a glass
I can't
set on the
remember
counter
on the television.
The sounds of
Her
a
voice
man
was
who
flat.
thought the architecture was
Not
still
angry
holding.
flat.
I put the
Not
folder
worried
back
flat.
exactly where it was.
The kind of flat that
Blue
comes when
tab,
someone has been sitting with
alphabetical,
information for
went
hours and has
downstairs.
already metabolized the shock.
He poured me a glass
and is now
and I
just
drank
holding
it,
the
and the
fact
wine
a set,
tasted the same as
something
it
built
always
to look
had.
like a life.
And
That's
that
where I
felt
left
like
off,
the
isn't it?
cruelest part.
Standing in my
That
own
nothing
bedroom,
in my
looking
mouth
at the
or my
pillows Mark had
kitchen
arranged
or my
that
house
morning,
had
two on each
changed,
side,
except me.
symmetrical.
But
the way he
filing
always did
cabinet
it,
wasn't what
and
broke
feeling
me
for the
open.
first time that
The
I was
filing
standing
cabinet
inside
was
a photograph
logistics,
of a marriage rather
math.
than a marriage.
The
The duvet pulled tight.
270
The lamp on his
hours is a
nightstand
number.
angled just
Numbers
so.
you can hold
Walter
at
asleep
arm's
at the foot of the
length.
bed,
What
one
broke
ear
me open
folded
was
under,
the journal.
breathing
Not
that
our
slow,
shared
wet
journal,
rhythm basset
the one
hounds
Lena
have when they're
prescribed.
completely unbothered
The one
by the
I
world
wrote
they
in
live
every
in.
Wednesday while
I
Mark
envied that
produced
dog,
his careful,
but here's what happened
polished
next,
entries across the
and
page.
I want to be honest about it.
His other journal,
The version of me that
the one
walked
in
through
his
this next
nightstand
part was
drawer,
not brave.
underneath
She was
the
not
paperback
suspicious.
he'd never
She was someone
finished.
who wanted the simpler
I'd known
answer
it
so
was there,
badly she built a house out of
never
it and
opened
moved
it.
in.
I
I told
respected
myself
the
the boundary.
story.
It went like
That's
this.
what good partners
Lena was
do.
a good therapist.
They honor the space.
She had done 14 months of
I
deep,
opened it on
thorough
a
work
Thursday
with Mark.
morning while he was
Of course,
in the
she didn't
shower.
need to ask him basic
I could hear
background
the water
questions in a
through the
joint
wall.
session. She
That
already had all
specific
that.
pitch our pipes make
Of
when
course,
the
she
pressure
seemed
drops.
familiar with his patterns.
I sat on
That
the
was
edge
the
of
point.
the bed and read.
That was what good
His
therapy looked
handwriting
like
is
from the
neat,
outside when you arrived
almost
late to it.
architectural.
You walk into a
Each
room where
entry
someone
dated,
already knows your husband
each
better than you
paragraph
expected.
deliberate,
And the strangeness
and the
of
language
that is a red flag.
I recognized
It's
it
evidence of
immediately
progress.
because it was the
And
language
the that had been poured into me for months. Has it occurred to you that the silence might not be about needing space and repair, but about keeping it, holding the tension between closeness and autonomy? She was doing her job, Lena's vocabulary, helping me see something I'd been too close to see. Hand like a student. I told myself Camille was being Camille. A paralegal, every entry an exercise, a woman who reads fine print every exercise oriented around and the same subject, a typo in her own lease agreement that saved her $400. Not Mark examining himself. Of course, she'd say something not like she Mark already wrestling with his own patterns or his damage or his history of marrying one woman the and worst hiding version her of from every the next. Story. I loved her for it. The way you
my
love a sister who always locks the
my
door
triggers,
twice. My
but I didn't need to
attachment
live inside her
style.
anxiety.
My tendency
So I called
toward
Camille back
over
the next day and
accommodation.
said, I think you're reading too
Entry
much into
entry
this.
about what I said.
She's just really
what
good at
I
what she
did,
does.
how I
And Camille
responded
said,
to the therapeutic
"Okay,
exercises,
One
what
syllable,
Lena observed
the same
about
way
my
she said it the
behavior
first
in
time.
session.
But I
He
didn't
was
hear the
keeping
filing
clinical
cabinet in her
notes
voice.
on his own wife.
I didn't hear a woman not arguing
One
because she'd
entry
already
dated
decided
8
to find
months
out for
before
herself.
I ever sat in
I heard
Lena's
agreement.
waiting room.
I went to the
Read.
second session.
L says
Following
Jay's
Tuesday,
pattern of
late
assuming the
afternoon,
best will make the
same office,
transition easier.
Same noise machine,
Her
whirring in the
instinct
waiting
is to
room.
trust the
That
framework,
sound,
not question
rain
the architect.
that doesn't quite sound like rain.
L says
More like static shaped
JS
into weather.
pattern.
Same
The
chair.
transition.
The magazines were in the
I
same
put the
position.
journal back.
I'm almost
Same
certain
position.
no one had touched them between
Same
sessions.
angle against the paperback.
Spine still perfect.
Press the
Still
spine
unopened.
down to match the impression it
Props.
had left on the wood.
Lena was warmer this
I
time.
heard the shower
She
turn off.
smiled when I came in.
I was sitting on the
and there
bed
was
looking
something
at my
different in
hands
the way she
when Mark
addressed
walked
us.
out with a
Not
towel
Mark
around
and
his
Jolene,
waist
but
and
you
said,
two.
"You
A
okay?"
unit.
And
She
I
said she wanted to introduce
"Just
something she'd been
tired."
working through with
And he
Mark in
kissed
their
the top of
individual
my
sessions.
head and went to get dressed.
She called it the architecture
His lips
of
were
silence.
warm.
The phrase
want
landed
that
in my
on
chest
record.
like a key turning.
Whatever else
She
he
explained
was,
it like this.
whatever
Long-term
else this
couples
was,
develop unspoken
his
contracts
lips were
about
warm
which
when they
topics are
touched
off
my
limits.
hair, and for
Over
one
time,
half second,
those contracts harden.
I was just
They
a
start to
woman
feel like
being
stability.
kissed by her
Like
husband.
the relationship is strong
and
because certain
everything
things
was
never
simple.
get disturbed.
Then
But
the
that's
half
not
second
intimacy.
ended.
That's
I
architecture.
drove to work and
And
sat in the
structure built to
parking
hold
lot for
weight,
20
but
minutes
never
before I
tested.
went inside.
Then she looked at me.
I wasn't crying.
Right at me.
I was doing
And she
something
said,
slower than crying.
You've built a beautiful
trying to
tolerance for
locate
Mark's
myself
quiet,
inside the
but
last
tolerance
7
isn't
years.
intimacy. Trying
I
to figure
cried.
out which version
Not
of
a
me was
lot.
real.
A few tears.
The woman
The
who
kind that
painted the
come when
front door
someone names
blue
the thing
and
you've
stood
been
back
circling
and
for
said,
years without
"We live
finding
here."
the word.
This
I
is
thought
ours.
she had just handed me clarity.
Was she real? The precise shape of my
Or was she a
loneliness
data
in this
point?
marriage. How Mark's
journal
silences
entry.
had become rooms I
A case
furnished with
study
my
Mark
own
brought to his
explanations,
weekly session
and
with
how
the woman who
exhausting
came
that
before
was.
me.
And how
What
I hadn't
no one
even
tells
known
you
I
about
was
this
tired.
kind of betrayal is that
Mark
it doesn't
reached over
just
and
rewrite
held my
the
hand.
past.
His fingers
It
were
reaches
warm.
into the
His grip
moments
was
that were
steady.
yours.
I looked
The
at
ones
him, and
you
his
held
face
as
was
proof
soft,
your life was in.
solid, present
and
in a way
empties
I
them
hadn't
from
seen
the
in
inside.
months. I didn't
The
look
shell
at Lena in that
stays.
moment. The weight
If I had,
goes. I wonder what
you
I would
pick
have
up a
seen.
memory that used to
After the
anchor
session,
you, and
Mark
it's
drove us to a
hollow.
restaurant on
I
Hawthorne.
thought about the Sunday
Low light.
prompts.
Bread they
That
bring before you
vulnerability
ask.
exercise
He was
Lena
lighter than he'd
assigned,
been in months.
the one where
Animated.
Mark wrote,
He talked
I
about
learned
the session
early
like a
that
man
people
who just
leave
had
when they
something
see the full
confirmed.
picture.
He said,
So I edit.
really think this is going to help
I'd
us.
read that
He
and
said,
felt tender toward
Lena
him.
is the best therapist
Thought,
I've ever had.
He's letting me in.
And then he said,
But he wasn't
and I want to
letting
give
me
you this
in.
line exactly as
He
it was
was
delivered
describing
because
what
I've
he
turned
was
it over
doing
to
so
me
many times
in real time
since that the edges are
in my
smooth.
presence. He said,
On a page
she
I
just
would
understands
read,
how I'm wired.
and I received
I
it as
nodded.
intimacy.
I said,
He edited
she really
everything.
does. We
His
ordered
past,
wine, split
his
a dessert.
therapist into a
It
stranger.
was one of the best evenings
His
we'd
first
had in
marriage
over a
into
year.
a sentence.
And I know now it was built
I
on
was
a
with
framework
someone
designed
for
to
a
keep
while
me
in
from
my late
asking the
20s.
questions that would have
A
ended
while.
everything.
3 years
The architecture
and a
of
courthouse
silence
wedding
wasn't a
in Humboldt County
diagnosis
is
of
a
our
while.
marriage.
And then he said,
It was an instruction manual
Lena
for
and
keeping
I
me
have
patient.
worked through most of it.
Over the next 3 weeks,
That
we
seam
attended
I
2 more
felt.
sessions.
That
Lena
place
gave us
where the
exercises,
sentence changed texture.
nightly check-ins.
He
5
wasn't
minutes
talking
before
about
bed,
therapeutic
where we
progress.
each shared one thing
He
we
was
noticed
talking
about
about
the
their
other that day.
marriage.
A shared
The one
journal,
with dishes and
leather-bound,
arguments and a
one she
dissolution
recommended we
file
filed under
where we'd each write an irreconcilable
entry once a week.
differences.
And a
He
vulnerability
and
prompt
Lena
for
had
Sundays.
worked through most
A
of
question
it.
we were supposed to
In
answer together.
270
I did every one
sessions,
of them,
while I slept
faithfully.
in the next room.
the way you follow a
I want to
prescription
talk
when you
about
believe
what
in a
it
doctor.
costs.
I
Not
wrote in
the
the journal
betrayal
every
as
Wednesday
an
night.
idea.
I
the
sat across
specific
from Mark every Sunday
daily
and answered the
tasks.
prompts.
It
I
cost
noticed
me
things
my
about
Wednesdays.
him and said them out
Every
loud
Wednesday
at
for
10:47
months,
each night.
I sat
Standing
at the
bathroom
bathroom
sink,
and wrote in that
toothbrush
shared
in
journal
hand,
because I
feeling
believed
like
we
the
were rebuilding
exercise
something
mattered.
important.
I wrote about
Mark
my
participated.
fears, about
That's
my
the word.
father who never
He participated
apologized
the way a
for
student
anything,
participates when the
and
teacher
how
is
I
watching.
sometimes flinched
His
when
journal
Mark went
entries
quiet
were clean.
because silence in my
Considered.
childhood meant
They used
someone
words
was
like
about to
attunement
leave and rupture.
I wrote
and
about the
repair.
miscarriage scare
They
in year
didn't
3.
sound like a man
About
sitting
the
with
night
a
I
pen
woke and a
up.
feeling.
And Mark wasn't
They
in
sounded
bed.
like a man sitting with
And
a
I
pen
found
and an
him in the
audience.
kitchen staring at the
I
wall.
noticed.
And I
Filed
sat
it
next
under
to
cases
him
trying.
and
He's
didn't
just
ask
more
a
formal in
single
writing.
question.
Then came
Because
the Sunday
I wanted
prompt
to
that
be the
cracked
kind of
floor.
wife who could hold
The question
space
was,
without demanding
what
it be
is
filled.
one thing from your life
I
before
wrote
this
all of that
relationship
in a
that still
journal
affects
that was
how
a
you show up
homework
today?
assignment from my
Mark
husband's
thought
first
about it,
wife.
picked up the
And
pen,
Mark read it.
wrote slowly
And
in that
presumably
architect's
Lena
handwriting he
read
had.
it. Or
Tall,
heard it.
even letters.
Or received the
He wrote,
summary of it in their
I learned
next
early
session.
that people leave when they see
My
the full
private
picture.
fears,
So
my
I edit.
childhood wounds,
I read it.
my
Something
quiet
cold
attempts
moved
at
through my
love,
sternum.
funneled
It was
into a
precise enough to
system
sound
I
honest
didn't
and vague
know
enough to mean
existed,
anything. analyzed by a woman whose stake in my marriage was older and deeper than mine.
He put the pen down.
That's what it
Looked
cost.
at me the way he looks at
Not
me
just
when
trust,
he wants me to feel held without
authorship,
actually being
the
answered.
sense that my inner life
he said,
belonged to me.
Just old stuff.
That when I said something
Lena and I
vulnerable,
have worked
it
through
landed
most
in
of
the
it.
room where I said it
Lena
and
and
stayed
I.
there.
Not
Instead,
my therapist
it was
and I.
transported,
Not in therapy.
processed.
Used
Not
to
even
calibrate
Dr.
the
Voss.
next exercise.
He said her name
the
like
next
you say
framework
the name of
someone you've sat
adjustment.
across from
The
1,000
next
times.
careful question
Someone
designed
whose
to make me
coffee
feel
order,
seen by a woman
I felt the
who was
seam,
seeing me the way
right
an
where the truth
architect
stopped
sees
and the
a
performance
load-bearing
began.
wall.
The way you
Not
can
with
feel
love,
a patch in drywall
but
if
with
you run your hand slow
calculation
enough.
about how much
But the
weight I
framework,
could hold before
Lena's
something
framework,
cracked.
the architecture
I
of
thought
silence,
about the nightly
the
check-ins.
model that said pressing too hard too
10:47,
fast could damage the
standing
process.
at the bathroom sink.
It sat between me
Toothbrush
and the
in
question,
hand.
like a guardrail.
Mark leaning
And I
against the
thought,
doorframe.
He's doing the
asking
work.
how my day was.
He's being vulnerable.
I'd tell him.
The Sunday prompt
He'd
is
nod.
working. The system is working.
Sometimes he'd share something
let it go.
small.
I let
thought
it go
those were
because the
hours.
system told me to.
Ordinary
And the
and
system was designed
unremarkable
by a woman who
and
needed me
hours.
to.
Now
There's
I
an
wondered
irony
which
so
of those
specific
check-ins
here
fed
that
the
I
next
still can't
session.
hold it without something in
Which
my
of
rib
my
shifting.
answers became entries?
Lena had given me a
Which of
language
my
to
Tuesday
understand
night
my own
observations
marriage,
about being
and that
tired
language was
or
the
happy
exact
about a
mechanism
project
keeping
at
me from
work
asking the
were
one
delivered
question
to
that would have
Lena the
unraveled
following
everything.
week as
Who
material.
are you? To my husband.
On the fourth day,
The
the
framework
last
wasn't a
day
flashlight.
before what I'd
It was
already
a curtain.
decided would be the
I
final
would have
session,
stayed behind it.
I found
Months,
the birthday card.
probably.
I
Doing
wasn't
the
looking
exercises.
for it. I was
writing
looking
in the
for
journal,
our passports
crying
because
in
some
some
part of my
when
brain
Lena
had
named
already
something true
started
enough to
planning
earn
an
my
exit.
trust. And
Then going
apparently,
home,
my
my
body
body
knew
knew
before
before
my
my
mind
silence
could
I'd
say
been
it
trained to
plainly.
respect.
The
I would have
passports were
stayed
in
because
Mark's
the lie was
desk
so well
drawer,
constructed that
and
living
next to
inside it
them,
felt like growth.
in a small stack of
But
things
Camille,
he'd kept, was the card
who
I
said
gave
okay
him 3 years
and
ago.
meant going to
I
find out
recognized
myself.
it immediately.
Camille, who works at a
Cream
family law
colored,
firm in Salem
a
and
simple
has
line
access to
drawing
public
of
records
2
databases,
trees leaning toward
who
each
once
other
told
on
me
the
the
front.
most dangerous document in the
Inside
world is
my
the one nobody
handwriting.
thinks to look for.
To the man who taught
She
me
ran
that
a background
love
check on
doesn't
Dr. Lena
have to be
Voss.
loud. She didn't tell
I
me she was
remember
doing
writing
it.
that.
Didn't ask
I
permission.
remember meaning it
She
so
waited until she
completely
had
that
what
my
she
hand
needed,
was steady.
and then she called me
I
on a
turned the
Wednesday
card
night,
over,
9:15,
on the back,
while I
in
was
Mark's
folding
handwriting,
laundry and half watching
2
something
words,
I can't remember on the
small,
television.
in pencil.
Her voice was flat,
like a note to
not
himself
angry
he
flat,
didn't want to commit
not
to in
worried
ink.
flat. The kind
Show
of flat
L.
that comes when someone
I
has been
held the
sitting with
card for a
information
long
for
time.
hours and has already
Walter
metabolized
came in
the
and
shock
pressed his nose
and is
against
now
my
just
knee,
holding
and I
the fact
scratched his
a set
ears without looking at him.
Something built
The
to
house
look like
was
a
quiet.
life. Mark was
That's
at work.
where I left off,
The
isn't it?
afternoon light came through the
Standing
window
in
at
my
the
own
angle
bedroom,
it always does at 3,
looking at the pillows
o'clock in
Mark had
November,
arranged that
hitting
morning.
the edge of the desk,
2 on each
making the
side,
pencil marks
symmetrical,
almost glow,
the way he
Show
always
L.
did it. He
and
wanted to
feeling
show
for the
her,
first time
my
that I
love,
was
the
standing inside
specific
a
private
photograph
chosen
of a
words
marriage
I wrote to
rather
him on
than
his
a
birthday.
marriage. He wanted
The
to bring
duvet
them to
pulled
Lena.
tight.
The
To his
lamp
first
on
wife.
his nightstand angled
I don't know
just
why.
so.
I've thought about
Walter
it every day
asleep
since,
at the foot of
and
the
I still
bed.
don't know.
One ear
Was it
folded
proof
under,
that he was loved?
breathing that
Evidence
slow,
that the
wet
arrangement
rhythm
was
basset
working?
hounds have
That
when they're
Jolene was
completely
happy?
unbothered
That Jolene
by the
was
world
fooled?
they live in.
That Jolene's
I
tenderness was
envied that
intact,
dog,
despite
but
everything?
here's what happened next.
Was it a trophy?
And I want to
A
be
report?
honest about it.
Or was it something
The
I can
version
barely
of
stand to
me that
consider?
walked through this
Was
next
it an
part
offering?
was not brave.
Did he bring my words
She was
to
not
Lena the way you
suspicious.
bring flowers
She
to
was
someone you're
who
trying
wanted
to hold
the
on
simpler
to?
answer
I was
so
not a
badly
wife.
she built a house
I
out
was
of
a letter of
it and
recommendation.
moved in. For
I
4
told
days
myself
I
a
slept next to
story.
him.
It
Ate
went
across
like
from
this.
him. Watched
Lena
him
was a
answer
good
his phone and leave
therapist.
the room and come
She
back
had done
and say,
14
just
months
work,
of deep,
and I
thorough
thought,
work with Mark.
Is there a name for
Of
her
course
in
she
your
didn't need to
contacts
ask
that I
him
wouldn't
basic
recognize?
background questions
Is
in a
she
joint
filed under
session?
something clean and
She already
alphabetical?
had all that.
The way everything else
Of
is.
course she seemed
I was
familiar
performing
with his
my
patterns.
own marriage.
That was
And
the
for
point.
the first time,
That
I
was what
understood
good
that
therapy
this was
looked
what Mark
like
had
from
been
the
doing
outside
all along.
when you arrived late
The
to
difference
it.
was
He'd
you
had
walk
7
into a
years
room
of
where
practice,
someone already
and
knows
I'd
your
had 4
husband
days,
better than you expected.
and already the effort
And the
was hollowing me
strangeness of
out
that
from the
is
center.
a red flag.
Camille Camille called on the
evidence
4th
of
night.
progress.
Not at 9:15,
And the question
her
she had
usual
asked,
Wednesday time.
Has
At
it occurred to
11:30.
you that the
Late
silence
enough
might
that
not
I
be
knew
about
it
needing
mattered.
space,
She said she'd been
but
building
about
the
keeping
licensing
it?
board complaint.
I told myself
Lena
that
treating
was
a former
precise
spouse
clinical
was a clear
language.
ethical violation
She was doing
under
her
Oregon
job,
statute.
helping
The
me
couple's
see
therapy
something I'd been
component,
too close
treating
to
the current
see.
wife of her
I
former
told
husband
myself
without
Camille was being
disclosure,
Camille,
elevated it.
a paralegal,
The insurance records,
a woman
the
who
marriage
reads fine
certificate,
print on
the
cereal
dissolution,
boxes,
more than enough.
and once flagged a
Then
typo
she said
in her
something
own
I
lease
wasn't
agreement that
expecting.
saved her $400.
I talked to a colleague today.
Of
Family
course
law
she'd say
attorney.
something like
She's handled
already knew
cases
him.
involving therapeutic
That's how
misconduct.
Camille's mind works.
A pause.
Patterns?
Jolene,
She said,
suspicion. This isn't the
worst
first complaint
version
filed
of
against
every
a therapist
story.
who treated a
I loved
former
her for
partner.
it.
But
The way
it
you
might
love
be
the
the first
sister
one
who
where the
always locks
therapist
the door
also ran
twice.
couples sessions with
But
the
I
new
didn't need
spouse.
to live inside
She
her
said the board will
anxiety.
move on this. So I
But
called
she also
Camille
said,
back the next day
she
and said,
stopped.
"What?
I think you're reading too
She
much
said,
into this.
you should prepare for the possibility
just
that
really
Lena
good
will
at what
claim
she
Mark
does."
represented himself as a
And
new
Camille
client.
said,
That
"Okay."
shall say she didn't
Flat.
recognize him.
One
Or
syllable.
that enough time had
The
passed.
same way she said it the
or
first
that she
time.
believed the therapeutic
But I
relationship
didn't
was
hear the
distinct
filing
from the
cabinet
personal
in her
one.
voice. She
I
married
didn't
him,
hear a
Camille.
woman not arguing
I
because
know.
she'd already
She
decided to
married
find
him
out for
and
herself.
divorced him.
And then
I
became
heard
his
agreement.
therapist and then became
I went to
our
the second
therapist.
session.
And she's going to
Following
say she didn't
Tuesday,
recognize
late
him.
afternoon.
I'm telling you
Same
what the defense
office.
might look like. Same noise
So you're
machine
ready.
whirring in the waiting room.
I was quiet.
That sound.
Walter had settled on the
Rain
bed next to
that
Mark,
doesn't quite
who was
sound
asleep.
like rain.
I was standing in the
More like
hallway with the
static
phone
shaped
pressed
into
to my
weather.
ear, looking
Same
at the strip
chair.
of light under the
The
bedroom
magazines
door.
were in the same
One
position.
more session, Camille
I'm
said.
almost certain
You go
no one
in.
had touched them.
You let her
between
make a clinical
sessions.
recommendation on the record.
Spines still perfect.
Something directive,
Still unopened.
something that shows she's actively
Props.
managing the therapeutic relationship
Lena was
as
warmer
his
this
provider.
time.
She
And
smiled
then
when
you
I
have
came
everything
in.
you need.
And there was
And
something
then what?
different in the way
And
she
then
addressed
you
us.
own the room.
Not Mark
I
and
didn't
Jolene,
sleep that night,
but you two.
I lay on my side of
a
the bed
unit.
and listened to Mark
She
breathe
said she
and
wanted
thought
to
about
introduce
the orchid
something
in Lena's
she'd been
waiting
working
room.
through with
The
Mark
silk
in their
one.
individual
I
sessions.
noticed it the first day.
She called it
Thought
the
it was real.
architecture of silence.
During the second session,
the phrase
while I was
landed
waiting,
in my chest.
I
like
reached
a
out
key
and
touched a
turning.
petal and felt the
She
fabric.
explained
and
it like
thought,
this,
almost warmly,
long-term
that it was a
couples
clever
develop
choice.
unspoken contracts
Low maintenance
about which topics
looked
are
alive
off
without
limits.
needing anything.
Over time,
I understood
those
now what I was
contracts
to
harden.
them. They
The
start
session
to
was
feel like
scheduled for
stability.
Thursday at 4.
Like the relationship
I ironed
is
a blouse
strong
that morning.
because certain things
I don't know
never
why.
get disturbed.
Some instinct toward
But
formality,
that's not intimacy.
toward composure.
That's architecture.
I wanted to walk into
a
that
structure
room looking
built
exactly
to hold
like
weight,
myself,
but never
precise
tested.
and deliberate and not
Then she
performing
looked
a
at
single
me,
thing.
right
I
at
put the
me,
marriage certificate
and
in my
she
bag.
said,
The
"You've
dissolution
built a
document
beautiful
underneath
tolerance for
it.
Mark's
The birthday
quiet,
card. My
but
birthday
tolerance
card,
isn't
with show
intimacy."
L in pencil on the back.
I cried.
In the inside pocket where I
Not a
could
lot,
feel its edge
a
against
few
my
tears.
ribs.
The
Mark
kind
drove.
that come when someone
He was
names
quiet
the
on the
thing
way.
you've been circling for
At a
years
red light, he
without
looked at me
finding
and
the
said,
word.
"You seem
I
different
thought she had
lately."
just handed me clarity.
Different how?
The precise
I don't know.
shape of my loneliness
More
in
still.
this marriage.
I looked
How
at the road.
Mark's silences had
Maybe
become
that's the
rooms
therapy
I furnished
working.
with my own
He almost
explanations,
smiled.
and how
Almost.
exhausting that
We
was.
pulled into the lot,
and how I hadn't
could
even
see the window
known
of
I
Lena's
was
office
tired.
from our parking space.
Mark
The light
reached
was
over
already on.
and held my hand.
She was already in there.
His fingers
in
were
the room
warm.
she'd built for this.
His grip was
with
steady.
the linen walls and the magazines
I looked at
no one
him,
reads,
and his face was soft,
and the noise machine turning
open,
static into weather.
present in a way
I picked up my
hadn't
bag,
seen in months.
felt the edge of the card against
I didn't
my ribs.
look at Lena in that moment.
I was ready.
But
I was
had,
not ready for what
I
Lena
wonder
did
what
in the
I would
first
have
5
seen.
minutes. Because
After
for the
this
first
session,
time since
Mark
I'd
drove
known
us
her,
to a restaurant
she went
on
off
Hawthorne.
script. And
Low
what she
light.
said wasn't clinical.
Bread they bring before
it
you
wasn't
ask.
careful.
He was
It
lighter
was the
than
first
he'd been
true
in
thing
months,
she'd ever offered me.
animated, and it came
He
with
talked
a cost
about the
neither
session
of us
like a
saw
man
coming.
who'd just had
Thursday
something
at
confirmed.
He
I pulled
said,
into the parking lot
"I
7
really
minutes early
think this
because
is going
Camille
to
told
help
me to be
us."
there first.
He said,
She said,
"Lena,
"You
is
set
the
the room.
best therapist
You
I've
don't
ever
walk into
had."
theirs."
And then he
I
said,
turned the engine off and
"And I
sat with
want to
my
give you
hands
this
at 10
line
and 2,
exactly as it
like
was
I was still
delivered because
driving.
I've turned it over
My bag
so
was on the
many
passenger
times
seat.
since
Inside
that the
it,
edges are
the marriage
smooth."
certificate,
He said,
the dissolution of marriage,
"She just
and the birthday
understands how
card in the
wired."
inside pocket.
I
Its edge
nodded.
pressed against the lining where I could
said,
feel it if I reached
"She
in.
really does."
3 documents.
We ordered wine.
2 from a courthouse
Split a
in Humboldt
dessert.
County.
It was
One
one
had
of the
my
best
handwriting in it,
evenings we'd
and
had
his
in over
handwriting
a
on the
year.
back.
In
And I know
pencil,
now it was
in 2
built on a
letters that
framework
dismantled
designed
everything
to keep
I
me
thought I
from
was.
asking the question.
I checked my face
that would
in the
have
rearview
ended
mirror.
everything.
Not for vanity. The architecture of
readiness.
silence
I
wasn't a
needed to look
diagnosis
like
of
myself.
our marriage.
Not the version that
It was an
cried in
instruction
session 2
manual
when
for
Lena
keeping me
described the
patient.
architecture of silence.
Over the next
and
3
I
weeks,
thought
we
I'd been
attended 2
seen.
more sessions.
Not the version
Lena
who wrote
gave
in
us
the shared journal
exercises,
every Wednesday,
nightly
handing handing over my father,
5 minutes
my
before
flinching,
bed,
where
my
we
miscarriage
each shared
scare,
one thing we
my
noticed
memory
about
of
the
sitting
other
beside
that day.
Mark on the kitchen
A
floor,
shared journal,
all of it fed
leather
into a
bound,
system I thought
one
was
she
healing
recommended
me.
we buy,
I needed
where
to
we'd
look like the
each write
woman
an
who'd read
entry
every
once a week.
insurance claim and a
who'd held the
vulnerability
journal from
prompt
his
for
nightstand
Sundays,
and read her
a
own
question we were
diagnosis in his
supposed to answer
architectural
together.
handwriting, who had
I did
replaced it
every
at the
one of
same
them,
angle, pressed the spine
faithfully,
to match the impression
the
on
way
the
you
wood,
follow a
and
prescription
walked out
when
of
you
the
believe
bedroom
in the
without
doctor.
making a sound.
I
I
wrote
got
in the
out of the
journal
car,
every Wednesday night,
locked it.
I sat
Walked
across
from
the
Mark
lot
every Sunday
the
and
waiting
answered
room
the
was the
prompts.
same. I noticed
Linen
things
walls,
about him,
low
and
light,
said them out loud
magazines
at
no one
10:47
reads,
each night.
the noise
Standing
machine
at the
behind the
bathroom
reception
sink,
desk,
toothbrush
still
in
humming its
hand,
counterfeit rain,
feeling like
and
we
the
were
orchid on
rebuilding
the side
something
table.
important.
The silk one I'd
Mark
thought was real the
participated.
first time I sat here.
That's the word.
I touched
He
it during my second
participated
visit,
the way a student
felt the fabric
participates
under
when
my
the teacher is
fingertip,
watching.
thought then it was a clever
His
choice.
journal entries
Low
were
maintenance,
clean,
looked alive
considered.
without needing anything.
They used words like
I stood in
attunement
front of it now
and rupture
understood what
and
I'd been to
repair.
them. I sat
They
down.
didn't sound like a
I
man
did not
sitting
smooth
with
my
a
skirt.
pen and a feeling.
The door opened at 4 exactly.
They sounded like a man
Lena
sitting
stepped
with a
out,
pen and an
she was
audience.
different. The gray
I
cardigan was
noticed,
there, but the
filed
buttons
it
were
under
wrong.
Keys's trying.
The second one
He's
threaded
just
through
more
the third
formal in
hole.
writing.
A small
Then came the
misalignment
Sunday
that on
prompt
anyone
that
else
cracked
I
the
wouldn't have
floor.
noticed.
The
But
question
Lena
was,
had never been less
what
than
is
precise.
one thing from
Her
your
surfaces
life
had
before
always
this
matched.
relationship that still
That's
affects
what made
how
her
you
good
show
at
up
this.
today?
Today the
Mark
surface
thought
had a
about
crack
it,
in it, visible
picked up the
only if
pen,
you knew where precision
wrote
lived.
slowly
She
in that
said my name,
architect's handwriting
smiled.
he had.
The smile
Tall,
didn't set properly.
even letters.
Mark was already
He wrote,
inside, seated
I
in his
learned
usual
early
chair,
that people leave
crossing
when
and
they see the
uncrossing
full
his
picture.
arms, left over
So
right,
I edit.
then right
I
over
read
left.
it.
A
Something
rotation
cold
he'd
moved
never
through my
seen
sternum.
before. He
It was
didn't look at
precise
me when I
enough to
came
sound
in.
honest and
He was
vague
looking
enough
at
to
Lena.
mean anything.
He was always looking at Lena.
I asked him what he meant.
I sat down.
What full
Set
picture?
my bag on the floor beside
Who
my
left?
chair.
Upright.
He put the pen
The zipper
down,
facing me.
looked at
And
me
I
the way
waited.
he looks at me.
Lena began.
When he wants me to
She
feel
said she
held
wanted to
without
try
actually
something
being
different
answered.
today.
She said the
And
word
he
trust,
said,
and I watched her mouth
just
shape
old
it.
stuff. And I thought about
Lena
the
and I have
272
worked
sessions.
through most of it.
52 weeks a year.
Lena and I.
7 years.
Not
Minus
my
the weeks
therapist
Mark
and
and I
I
were in Cannon Beach.
Not in therapy.
Minus the anniversary in Bend.
Not even Dr.
Minus
Voss.
Thanksgiving at my
He
mother's
said
house.
her name like you say the
Every
name of
gap
someone
in the
you've
insurance
sat across
records
from
aligned
1,000
perfectly with the
times.
trips where I believed
Someone
I
whose
had him to
coffee order
myself.
you know.
She had
I
tracked
felt
his
the
absences
seam,
the way a wife does,
right where the
because
truth
she was
stopped
one,
and the performance
she
began.
asked me,
If
the
you
way
could
you
ask
can
Mark
feel a
one
patch in
question you've
drywall
never
if you run
asked,
your hand slow
and he
enough.
had to answer honestly,
But the framework,
what would it be?
Lena's
The room was
framework,
so quiet I
the
could hear the wall
architecture
clock
of
above the
silence,
filing cabinet,
the model
Lena's
that said
filing
pressing
cabinet.
too hard too
I thought about
fast
Mark's
could
at
damage
home.
the process.
Blue tabs for medical,
It sat
green
between
for
me
financial,
and the question,
yellow for insurance.
like a guardrail.
You don't build a
And I
filing
thought,
system that clean unless
he
you
is
need to
doing
know
the work.
exactly where every
He's
piece
being
of your life is
vulnerable.
stored.
The Sunday
Both of them,
prompt is working.
architect and
the
therapist,
system is working.
organizing the evidence
I
of a
let it
life
go.
they'd constructed around me.
I let it go.
I let the
because
silence
the
hold.
system told me to.
Let it expand until it pressed
And the
against
system
the
was
walls.
designed by a woman
Then I
who
said,
needed me to.
I'd ask him how long
There's
he's
an
been seeing
irony
you.
so specific
Mark's
here
shoulders
that
drew
I
up.
still can't
Not a
hold it
flinch.
without something
A
in my
brace.
ribs shifting.
Lena's expression didn't
Lena
shatter.
had given me a language
shifted,
to understand my
like a
own
window
marriage,
adjusting to pressure.
and that language was
Something
the
moved
exact
behind her
mechanism
eyes,
keeping me from
not
asking
panic,
the one question that would have
surprise.
unraveled
Recognition.
everything.
The
Who
face
are
of
you?
someone
To
who has
my
imagined this
husband.
moment enough times to
The
have a
framework
response
wasn't
prepared,
a flashlight,
and then
it
discovers
was
the
a curtain.
preparation is useless.
I would have stayed behind
Not
it.
14 months, I
Months,
said. The real
probably.
number. I
Doing
looked at
the
Mark.
exercises,
4 years.
writing in the journal,
The insurance records go
crying
back to
in
2017
sessions when
Mark.
Lena named something
1 year
true
after you
enough
married
to
me.
earn my trust.
He opened his mouth.
Then
and
going
Lena raised her
home
hand.
and lying next
It
to
was
a man
small.
whose silence
Just
I'd
a
been
lift of the
trained to
palm.
respect.
Fingers slightly
I
spread.
would have stayed because
Wait.
the lie was so well
Or stop.
constructed that living
Or let me
inside
handle
it felt
this.
like growth.
It wasn't clinical.
But Camille,
There was no therapeutic
Camille,
framework for
who
that
said
gesture.
okay,
It was the
and meant
reflex of a
I'm
woman
going
who
to
had
find
spent
out
3 years
myself.
learning when to
Camille,
intercept him.
who works at a family
The
law
motion
firm
of a
in
first
Salem
wife
and
managing
has
a conversation
access
in
to
front of a
public
second.
records databases.
Mark closed his
who
mouth.
once told me the most
Because
dangerous
Lena told him
document
to.
in the world
In
is
front
the
of
one
me.
nobody thinks to look
I
for.
reached into my bag.
She ran a
I took out
background
the
check
marriage
on Dr.
certificate.
Lena Voss,
Humboldt County, California.
She didn't tell me she was doing
2009.
it.
Mark
Didn't
didn't
ask
hail
permission.
Lena Marie Kovac.
She waited
and
until
placed
she
it on
had
the
what
table
she
between
needed,
us.
and then she
I didn't
called
narrate
me
it,
on a Wednesday
didn't
night.
explain. 9:15.
I set it down the way
While
Camille
I
had
was
set it on her
folding
kitchen
laundry
table
and
3
half
weeks
watching
ago,
something I
flat,
can't remember
square to
on
the
the television,
and let the document
her
do what
voice was
documents
flat.
do.
State
Not
facts.
angry flat.
Then I placed
Not
the
worried
dissolution
flat.
beside it.
The kind of
2012,
flat that comes when
filed
someone
by
has
Lena,
been sitting with information
irreconcilable
for hours
differences.
and has already
Lena looked
metabolized
down.
the shock.
Her breathing
and is now
changed.
just holding
The
the
inhale
fact,
went shallow.
a set caught somewhere
Something
above her
built to
sternum.
look like a life.
She didn't touch the
That's
papers.
where I left off, isn't it?
She looked at them the way
Standing
you
in
look
my
at
own
something you
bedroom,
buried and
looking at the
believed
pillows
would stay
Mark had
underground.
arranged that morning.
I know
Two
who you
on
are,
each side,
I said,
symmetrical.
I've known for
the way
3
he
weeks.
always did it.
And
I came
feeling
back for the
because
first
I wanted
time
to see it
that
clearly.
I was standing inside a
I
photograph
paused.
of a marriage
Let the
rather
clock
than
tick.
a marriage.
And I
The
have.
duvet pulled tight.
Mark spoke
The lamp
first.
on his nightstand
He leaned
angled
forward,
just so.
elbows on his knees,
Walter
and he began
asleep at the foot of
constructing.
the bed.
That's
one
the word
ear
for it.
folded under.
He didn't talk.
breathing that
He built.
slow, wet rhythm.
He said they'd
basset
reconnected
hounds have when
accidentally.
they're completely unbothered
Said she'd become
by
a
the
therapist
world they
since
live
the
in.
divorce.
I
A
envied
real
that
one.
dog.
And
But
he
here's what
genuinely
happened next.
believed she could help
And I
him
want to
because
be
she
honest
understood
about
him
it.
in ways other clinicians
The version of
couldn't.
me that walked
He
through
said
this
it
next
evolved.
part was not brave.
Said he didn't know how
She
to
was
tell
not
me
suspicious.
without it sounding like what
She
it
was
sounds
someone
like.
who wanted the
He
simpler
used
answer
complicated
so
four
badly
times.
she built a house
Boundaries
out of it
3
and
times.
moved in.
Context twice.
I told myself
and
a
nuance
story.
once.
He
It
sounded
went like
exactly
this.
like the man
Lena was
he'd
a good
fallen in
therapist.
love with at that dinner
She had
party
done
in Portland
14
when I
months
was
of
30.
deep, thorough
The
work
one
with
who
Mark.
talked about feelings
Of course, she
without
didn't
being
need to
asked.
ask him basic
Who
background
said emotional
questions in a joint
literacy was the
session.
most important
She already
quality
had
in
all
a
that.
partner.
Of course,
Every
she
word
seemed
was a
familiar with
brick.
his patterns.
Every sentence
That
was
was
a
the
wall.
point.
The same
That
architecture.
was what good therapy looked
the
like
same
from the
silence
outside
dressed
when you
as
arrived late
openness.
to it.
I turned
You
to
walk
Lena.
into a room where someone
had not
already
moved.
knows your husband
Hands in
better
her
than
lap,
you expected.
one folded
And
over
the
the other.
strangeness of
The
that
way she
is a
sat
red
when she was
flag.
listening.
It's evidence of
Except
progress.
she wasn't performing listening
And the question
anymore.
she had asked,
She was enduring.
has it occurred to you that the
I
silence
never intended
might
for
not
it to
be about
become
needing
this,
space,
she said,
but about keeping
I
it?
held her gaze.
I told myself
You
that was
conducted
precise
couples
clinical
therapy on your
language.
ex-husband
She
and
was
his
doing her
wife.
job.
You
Helping me
assigned
see
us
something I'd been
exercises.
too close
You
to
had
see.
me write in a journal
I told
every
myself
Wednesday
Camille was being
about my
Camille,
father,
a paralegal,
about my fear when Mark
a
went
woman
quiet,
who reads fine print
about the
on
worst
cereal
night of my
boxes,
marriage,
and once
and you
flagged
sat
a
in this
typo
chair
in her own
and read it
lease
back to
agreement
me
that
as
saved her
insight.
$400.
You diagnosed
Of
our
course
dynamic
she'd say
using a
something like
framework
she
you
already
named after
knew
the
him.
thing you were doing to
That's
us.
how Camille's
The
mind
architecture
works.
of silence.
Patterns,
I
suspicion.
paused.
The worst
You
version
knew who
of
I
every
was
story.
the first time I walked
I
in
loved her
here.
for it.
What
The way
part
you
of
love
that
the
wasn't
sister
intended?
who always locks the door twice.
Lena didn't answer,
But I didn't need to live
her
inside
mouth
her
opened
anxiety.
once, barely.
So I called
then
Camille back
closed.
the next day and said,
And that silence,
I think you're
the
reading
first
too
one
much
she
into
hadn't
this.
designed. The
She's
first
just
one
really
she
good
couldn't
at what
frame
she
as
does.
therapeutic restraint.
And Camille
was
said,
the most honest
okay,
thing she had offered
flat.
in that room since it
One
walked
syllable.
through the door 5
The same way
sessions
she
ago.
said it the first time.
I reached into my bag
But I didn't
one
hear
more
the filing
time.
cabinet in her
the
voice.
birthday card.
I didn't hear a
Cream
woman
colored.
not arguing
Two
because she'd
trees
already
leaning toward
decided
each
to
other
find
on the
out for
front.
herself.
My handwriting
I heard
inside.
agreement.
To the
I
man
went
who
to the
taught me
second
that
session.
love doesn't have to be loud.
Following Tuesday,
I
late
turned it over.
afternoon, held it
Same
up so they
office.
could both see the back.
Same noise
Mark's
machine
handwriting
whirring in the waiting
pencil.
room. That
2
sound.
words.
Rain
Show
that
L.
doesn't quite sound like
Mark's
rain.
face went
More
white.
like static
Not
shaped into
red.
weather.
White.
Same chair.
The blood didn't
The
rush
magazines
in.
were in the same
It
position.
evacuated.
I'm almost
He
certain
recognized
no one
it
had touched
instantly,
them,
and in
between
that
sessions.
recognition was the confession his
Spine
mouth
still
would never
perfect.
deliver, still unopened.
He had taken my love note and marked
Props.
it for export.
Lena was
In
warmer
pencil,
this time,
because pencil
she
can be
smiled when I
erased.
came in,
Because pencil
and there was
is
something
uncommitted,
different in the way she addressed
tentative,
us.
deniable.
Not Mark and Jolene,
Pencil
but you
says this
two.
happened, but
A
I
unit.
can undo the evidence
She
if
said
I
she
need
wanted to introduce something
The way
she'd
he'd
been
written
working through
I
with
learned
Mark
early
in their
that
individual
people leave when they
sessions.
see the full picture.
She called it
the architecture
So I
of
edit.
silence.
And I thought
The
it was
phrase landed
vulnerability.
in my chest like
It
a
was a
key
confession
turning.
disguised as
She
a prompt
explained it like
answer.
this. He was an
Long-term
editor.
couples develop
Always had been.
unspoken contracts
Pencil
about
on
which
the back of
topics
my
are
love,
off limits,
ready to
Over
erase
time,
if anyone
those
looked too
contracts
closely.
hardened.
They start to
I
feel like
set the
stability,
card on the table between
like the
the marriage
relationship is
certificate
strong
and the
because certain
dissolution.
things never get disturbed.
3 documents.
But that's not
His
intimacy.
first marriage,
That's
his first
architecture. divorce, a
and the
structure
proof
built
that
to
his
hold
second
weight,
marriage was
but never
material he
tested.
carried to the first wife's
Then
office
she looked
like
at me,
homework.
right at me,
Like evidence that
and
the
she
replacement
said,
was performing
"You've
well.
built a beautiful
Lena
tolerance
looked
for
at the
Mark's
card,
quiet,
and for
but
the first
tolerance
time,
isn't intimacy."
her face did something it
I
had never
cried.
done in my presence.
Not a lot,
It
a few
crumpled.
tears,
Not
the kind
dramatically,
that come when
a
someone names
compression
the
around
thing
the
you've been
eyes,
circling for
a
years
pulling at the
without
corners
finding
of the
word.
mouth,
The kind
I
of
thought she had
fracture
just
that
handed me
happens when
clarity.
composure held for
The
years
precise
finally
shape of my
gives.
loneliness
She
in
had
this
seen this card
marriage.
before.
How Mark brought it to
silences
her,
had become rooms
just
I
as he'd
furnished with my
instructed
own
himself.
explanations,
And whatever
and
she
how
felt when
exhausting
she
that
read my
was,
inscription,
and how I hadn't
jealousy,
even known I was
validation,
tired. Curiosity.
Mark reached over
power.
and held my hand.
She was feeling the
His
cost of it
fingers
now.
were warm,
With
his
me
grip
watching.
was steady.
I
I
stood
looked
up.
at him, and his face was
Albeit
soft,
Camille's,
open.
I said to Mark,
present in a way
I didn't look
hadn't
at him
seen
when I
in
said
months.
it. I was
didn't look
done
at
arranging
Lena
my
in that
face for
moment.
his comfort.
If I had,
I turned
I
to
wonder
Lena.
what I would have seen.
A complaint will be
After
filed
the
with
session,
the Oregon
Mark
Board of
drove us
Licensed
to a
Professional
restaurant on
Counselors.
Hawthorne.
You're
Low
a real
light.
therapist.
Bread they
You
bring
know what
before
this
you
costs.
ask. He
She
was
nodded.
lighter than he'd been in
One
months.
small dip of the
animated.
chin.
He
I
talked
think,
about the session
in
like
that
a man
moment,
who'd just
she
had
did
something
know.
confirmed. Not
He
just the
said,
professional cost.
I really think
the
this is going to
license,
help us.
The practice.
He said,
the years
Lena
of legitimate
is the
work that
best
would collapse
therapist
under
I've
this.
ever had.
But the other cost.
And then he said,
the one where you
and I
build
want
an
to give you
entire
this line
identity
exactly as
after
it was
a failed
delivered because
marriage,
I've turned it
brick
over
by
so
brick,
many times,
credential by
since
credential,
that the edges are smooth.
And then
He
you
said,
let the man from the
she
failed
just
marriage
understands how
walk
I'm
back through
wired.
the door
I
and
nodded.
sit in your client chair
I
and
said,
call you doctor.
She really does.
And you convince
We ordered
yourself
wine.
it's different now.
Split a dessert.
It's professional
It
now.
was one of the best evenings
and you
we'd
treat
had
his
in
new
over a
wife
year.
and study her.
And I know now
and
it
maybe
was built
even
on a
believe you're
framework
helping
designed to keep me
until
from
a
asking
woman
the
puts your
question
own
that would
dissolution
have
of
ended
marriage on the table
everything.
in front of you.
The
and
architecture of silence
falls.
wasn't a diagnosis
I
of
picked
our
up the
marriage.
documents. All
It was
three.
an instruction
I
manual
put them
for
back in my
keeping me
bag.
patient.
I didn't leave
Over the
them
next
anything.
3 weeks, we attended
I walked
2 more
out.
sessions.
Did not slam
Lena
the door.
gave us exercises,
Closed it with
nightly
a click.
check-ins,
The latch
5
catching
minutes before
clean
bed,
and final,
where we each
and
shared
walked
one
past the
thing
silk
we
orchid
noticed
without
about the
touching
other that
it.
day.
The parking
A
lot was
shared
still
journal,
light, leather-bound,
October,
late
one
afternoon.
she recommended we buy.
I got
where
in
we'd
my
each
car
write an
and
entry
sat with my
once a
hands
week,
on the wheel and breathed.
and a vulnerability prompt
Not
for
the
Sundays.
deep therapeutic breaths
A question
Lena
we were
had taught
supposed
us.
to answer together.
Just breathing.
I did every one
the
of
kind
them,
your body does when it
faithfully.
remembers it's allowed
the way
to.
you follow a
I drove to
prescription when you
Camille.
believe in the doctor.
She was standing on the porch.
I wrote in the journal every
She didn't
Wednesday
ask
night.
how it went.
I sat across
She
from
looked
Mark
at my
every
face
Sunday and
stepped
answered the
aside
prompts.
and let me
I
in.
noticed things about him
3 months later
and said them out loud at
I filed for
10:47
divorce
each night.
Mark
Standing
did
at the
not
bathtub
contest it.
sink,
The
toothbrush
process
in
was
hand,
procedural,
feeling like we were
documents,
rebuilding something
signatures,
important.
the legal
Mark
unwinding
participated.
of a thing that had
That's
been
the word.
structurally unsound
He
from its
participated
second
the way
year.
a student participates
Camille's
when the teacher
colleague
is
handled
watching.
it. Mark moved
His
out on a
journal
Saturday
entries
while
were
I was
clean,
at the farmer's market.
considered.
They
I
used
came home
words
to
like
gaps,
attunement, his
and
books
rupture,
gone from the
and
shelf,
repair.
his coats missing
They
from the
didn't
hall
sound
closet,
like a man
the
sitting
filing
with a
cabinet
pen and a
emptied of the
feeling.
blue and green
They
and yellow
sounded like a
tabs.
man sitting with
He
a
left
pen
the
and an
furniture.
audience.
He left Walter.
I noticed.
And the blue front
Filed
door
it
was
under
still
keys
there,
as trying.
the one I'd
He's
painted
just
on
more
a
formal in
Saturday
writing.
3 years ago.
Then
while he
came
handed
the
me the
Sunday
brush,
prompt that cracked
and
the
Walter
floor.
barked at nothing in the
The question
grass.
was,
It still
what
meant we
is
live
one
here.
thing from your
Just
life before this
not we
relationship that
anymore.
still affects how you show
Just
up
here.
today?
Just
Mark thought about
me.
it. Picked up
The
pen,
licensing board complaint
wrote
moved
slowly
forward.
in that
Camille
architect's
built it
handwriting he had.
meticulously.
Tall,
Dates,
even
insurance
letters.
records,
He
session
wrote,
logs.
I learned
The documented
early that people
timeline
leave
showing
when they
Lena
see
had
the full
treated a
picture.
former spouse and his
So
current
I edit.
wife without
I read it.
disclosure. Something cold
Under
moved through my
Oregon
sternum.
statute,
The violation
It was
was
precise
clear.
enough to sound honest
Treating
and vague
Mark
enough to
alone
mean anything.
would have been enough. I asked him what
Treating
he meant.
us together
What
elevated
full
it
picture?
to something the board
Who
couldn't
left?
wave away.
He put the pen
Lena's
down.
attorney responded
Looked
with a
at me the way
carefully
he
worded
looks at
letter,
me,
stating
when he
that
wants me
Dr.
to feel
Voss
held
believed
without
the
actually
therapeutic
being
relationship
answered.
had been conducted
he
in
said,
good faith,
Just
and
old
that the
stuff.
prior marriage had been
Lena and
sufficiently
I
distant
have worked
in time
through most of
to
it
constitute a distinct
Lena and
relational
I.
context.
Not my
The
therapist.
board did
and
not
I.
agree.
Not
Lena's
in therapy.
license was suspended pending
Not even
formal
Dr.
review.
Voss.
Her
He said
psychology
her
today
name like you
profile
say the
went
name
dark.
of someone you've sat across
The
from
office with the
1,000
linen
times.
walls and the silk
Someone
orchid
whose coffee
closed.
order you know.
I don't know what she
I
did
felt
after
the
that.
seam.
Whether she
Right
stayed
where
in
the truth
Portland
stopped
or went
and
back
the
to Northern
performance began.
California or somewhere else
The way
entirely.
you can feel a patch in drywall
I
if
thought
you
I
run
would
your
feel
hand slow
satisfaction
enough.
when I heard about the
But the
suspension.
framework.
Lena's
didn't.
framework.
The
I felt the
architecture
specific
silence.
heaviness of watching
The
someone
model that
lose
said
the thing
pressing
they
too
built
hard
to
too
prove they'd
fast could
survived
damage
the
the
last
process.
thing they lost.
It sat
Mark
between
called
me
once,
and the
about
question,
6 weeks after
like a
he moved out.
guardrail. And I thought,
Tuesday night, he is doing the work.
I was on the couch with Walter,
He's being vulnerable,
and his name appeared on my
the
phone,
Sunday
and I
prompt
stared
is
at it
working.
for 3
The
full
system
rings
is working.
before I answered.
I let it go.
His voice was careful.
I let it go.
He said
because
he
the
wanted
system
me to
told
know
me
that
to.
his relationship with
And the
Lena
system
was
was
never
designed
physical,
by a woman who
not
needed
during
me
our
to.
marriage,
There's
not
an
during the
irony so
sessions.
specific
He
here
called
that
it
I
an
still
emotional
can't hold it
entanglement he
without
should have
something in my
recognized
ribs
and
shifting.
ended. He
Lena
said he
had
was
given me a
sorry.
language to
He
understand
used
my
all the
own
right
marriage,
words,
and
in
that
the right
language was
order,
the exact
with the right
mechanism keeping
pauses.
me from asking the one
I said,
question that would have
"Was
unraveled
any of it
everything.
real?
The
Who
way
are
you
you
were with
to
me?
my husband?
Was any of it yours?
The framework wasn't a
Or was
flashlight.
all of it something
It
you
was a
rehearsed in
curtain.
her office first?
I would have stayed behind
He
it.
was quiet for a long
Months,
time,
probably.
Then he said,
Doing
I
the
don't know how to answer that
exercises,
honestly.
writing in the journal.
It was the most truthful
crying
thing
in
he ever
sessions
said
when
to
Lena
me,
named
and I
something true enough
recognized
to
it.
earn my trust.
The same raw,
Then going
accidental
home
honesty
and lying
as
next
the
to a
Sunday
man
prompt
whose silence
answer
I'd
I'd
been
once
trained to
mistaken
respect.
for intimacy.
I would have stayed because
I
the
learned
lie
early
was so well
that people
constructed
leave when
that
they
living
see the
inside
full
it
picture.
felt like growth.
So I edit.
But Camille,
He couldn't answer because he
who
didn't
said
know
okay
where the editing
and
ended,
meant
and he
going
began
to find out myself.
the full picture he'd
Camille,
been
who
hiding
works
from
at a family
everyone,
law firm in
from
Salem
Lena,
and has
from
access
me,
to public records
maybe
databases,
from himself,
who
was
once
that there
told
might
me the
not
most
be
dangerous
anything
document
behind the
in the
edits.
world is the one
I
nobody
hung up
thinks to
and
look
set
for.
the phone face down on
She
the
ran
cushion,
a background check
and
on
Walter
Dr.
pressed
Lena
his
Voss
nose to my knee, and I put
She
my
didn't
hand
tell
on
me
his
she
head
was doing it
and stayed like
didn't
that
ask
until the
permission.
light was gone from the room.
She waited until
I
she
kept
had
the
what
shared
she
journal,
needed, and then
I
she
don't know
called
why.
me on a Wednesday night.
It sits in a box in the
9:15,
closet with the divorce
while I was
documents
folding
and the copies
laundry
of the
and
licensing
half watching
complaint.
something I can't
I
remember
haven't opened
on the
it,
television,
but I know what's in it.
Her voice was
My
flat.
handwriting.
Not
Every
angry
Wednesday,
not
pouring the
worried
most
flat.
private parts of
The
myself
kind of flat
into a
that comes
homework
when someone
assignment
has
given
been
to
sitting
me
with
by
my
my
husband's
husband's
first
hours
wife
and has already
my father who
metabolized
never
the shock
apologized,
and is now
the
just
night I
holding
sat
the
on the
fact
kitchen
a
floor
set.
beside Mark because he was
Something
staring
built
at
to
the
look like
wall
a
and I
life.
didn't know what else to do.
That's where I left off, isn't
The
it?
miscarriage scare in
Standing
year
in
3,
my own bedroom,
all of it,
looking at
offered
the
in good
pillows
faith,
Mark had arranged
received
that
as
morning.
data.
2 on
I
each
think about
side,
Lena's question from that
symmetrical,
first session,
the way he always
when
did
Mark
it,
goes quiet,
and feeling for the
what
first
do you tell
time
yourself
that
about
I
why?
was standing inside a
I
photograph
told her
of
I
a
assumed
marriage
he needed
rather
space.
than a marriage.
She said,
The duvet
has it
pulled
occurred
tight.
to you that the
lamp on
silence
his
might not be
nightstand
about needing
angled just
space,
so,
but about keeping
Walter
it?
asleep at the foot
She
of
was
the
right.
bed,
She
one
was
ear
always
folded
right.
under.
That was the
Breathing
cruelest
that slow,
part.
wet rhythm
The
Basset
diagnosis
hounds
was
have when they're
accurate.
completely
The treatment
unbothered
was
by
the
the world
disease.
they live in.
But the diagnosis
I envied that
was
dog.
accurate.
But here's what happened
I
next.
moved Walter's bed
and I
from
want
the
to be
hallway
honest
into the
about it.
bedroom.
He
The
sleeps
version
at the
of
foot
me
of the
that
bed
walked
now,
through this
and
next part
sometimes
was
at
not
3 in the
brave.
morning I hear him
She was
shifting,
not suspicious,
turning in circles
She was
the way
someone who
dogs
wanted
do
the
before they
simpler
settle.
answer so badly
And the
she
sound
built a
is the
house
most
out of it and moved
uncomplicated
in.
thing in my life.
I told myself a story.
I don't know if Mark loved
It
me.
went like this.
I think he did.
Lena was a good
in the
therapist.
way he was capable of.
She had done
which was a way that
14
required
months
an
of deep,
audience.
thorough work with
He
Mark.
loved me the way a
Of
man
course, she
loves
didn't
when
need
he
to
needs
ask
a
him
witness to
basic
report
background
back that he
questions
is
in
good.
a joint session.
I was
She
the
already
evidence.
had all that.
The birthday card,
Of course,
the
she
shared
seemed
journal,
familiar with his patterns.
the Wednesday confessions.
That was the point.
I was the material
That
he
was
brought
what
to
good
Lena
therapy looked like
to
from the
prove he could be
outside when
loved
you arrived
correctly
late
this
to it.
time.
You
And
walk
Lena
into a
received
room
it.
where someone already
Session
knows your
after
husband
session,
better than you expected.
year after year,
And the strangeness
and I
of
think
that
some
is
part
a
of
red
her
flag.
needed that proof too.
It's evidence of progress.
That he could be better for someone
and
else.
the question she had asked,
or that he couldn't.
has it occurred to you that
I don't
the
know which
silence
answer
might
she was
not
looking
be about
for.
needing space,
Maybe she didn't
but
either.
about keeping it?
Camille
I
asked
told
me
myself
once if
that
I
was
regretted
precise
not
clinical
confronting him
language.
sooner.
She was
Blowing
doing
it
her
open
job
in session 3,
helping me see something
moment
I'd
I
been
felt
too
the
close to
wrongness.
see.
I
I
told
told
her
myself
no.
Camille was
If
being
I'd
Camille,
done that,
a
I would have been the
paralegal,
one screaming in a
a
room
woman
full of
who reads
composure,
fine print
and they
on
would have
cereal
managed me the
boxes,
way they managed
and once
everything,
flagged a typo
with
in her
own
own
lease
lease
and
agreement
language
that saved
and
her
the therapeutic
$400
authority to make my anger
Of
sound
course,
like a
she'd say
symptom.
something like
Instead,
she already knew him.
I waited.
That's how
I built.
Camille's mind works.
I showed up with the
Patterns,
documents and the card
suspicion,
and the truth,
the worst version,
and I set
of
it all
every
on the
story.
table without raising
I loved
my
her
voice.
for it,
And I
the way
watched
you
the
love the sister
architecture
who always
collapse
locks
from
the
the
door
inside.
twice.
The
But I
silence
didn't need
that
to live
fell
inside
after
her
I placed the
anxiety.
birthday card face
So
up
I
on
called
that
Camille
table.
back the next day and
That
said,
silence was mine.
I think you're reading too much
not
into
Mark's.
this. Not Lena's.
She's just really good at what
not
she does.
the architecture of anything.
And Camille said, said,
Just the quiet
okay,
that comes after someone
flat.
finally stops performing.
One syllable. The same way
Last
she
week
said it
I
the
went
first
for a
time.
walk with Walter along
But
the
I
river.
didn't hear the filing cabinet
Early.
in her voice.
The fog was
I
still
didn't
sitting
hear a
on
woman
the water,
not arguing
and the trees
because
along
she'd
the bank
already
were bare,
decided to find
leaning
out for herself.
slightly in the direction the wind
I
had
heard
bent
agreement.
them over years.
I went to the second
Two
session.
of them stood close together,
Following Tuesday,
tilted toward
late
each other
afternoon,
the way trees do when
same
they grow
office,
in proximity.
same
Not
noise
because they
machine
chose
whirring
it,
in the waiting room,
but because the
that
conditions
shaped
sound.
them that way.
Rain,
Like
that
the
doesn't
two
quite
trees
sound
on the
like
front of
rain.
that birthday card.
More like
The
static
one I'd
shaped
chosen,
into weather,
because I thought
same
it looked like
chair.
us.
The
Leaning
magazines were
toward
in the
each
same
other,
position,
devoted.
I'm almost certain
I
no
looked
one
at
had
them for a
touched
long
them
time.
between sessions.
Then I kept walking,
spines